Okay, ma. Okay, start.
A beautiful morning to all of you. I take immense joy in welcoming you for the celebrating the birth anniversary of Martin Luther King. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. With this beautiful quote of Martin Luther King, I extend a hearty welcome to our Honorable Chairman Sri M.B. Muthuramalingam sir, our esteemed Director Sri M.B.M. Sasikumar sir, our beloved Director Academics Srimati Gitanjali Sasikumar ma'am, respected Principal ma'am, staff members, and my dear friends. Yeah, it's Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, which is celebrated every year on 15th Jan. Who is Martin Luther King? Why do we all celebrate his birthday? What's so special with him? Don't worry, I'll tell you about it. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Baptist minister and an activist who became the most visible spokesman and leader in the American civil rights movement. In the 1950s and 60s, Luther King Jr. and many others fought to end racial segregation in the southern United States and discrimination against the African Americans. He worked to make sure all Americans had equal rights. He believed in nonviolent protest and made sure others followed him in his quest. His great leadership quality was integrity, which he showed when he gave his life for what he was fighting. We celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday in honor of his life achievements and influence as an American civil rights leader. So now I take up the pleasure to call upon Shamus to give a speech on the topic I Have a Dream.
Good morning to one and all presenter. I'm Sham of class 9A here to tell you about Dr. Martin Luther King. To Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most important leaders of the American civil rights movement. That was the effort to extend equal rights to all people regardless of race. In the first half of the 20th century, this was even a controversial idea. In many parts of the country, African Americans were barred from participating in ordinary life. They couldn't eat at the same lunch tables, go to the same school, or even use the same bathroom as white people did. This act of separation was called segregation. In South of America, it was even worse due to the Jim Crow laws. Whites policed black behavior. African Americans had to live in a separate neighborhood because of this. They had to hold specific jobs and talk to whites with utmost respect. If they tried to fight it, there is jail time, injury, even death. Martin Luther King grew up in the midst of all these inequalities. He was born in 1929 to a middle class family in Atlanta, Georgia. Both his grandfather and father were pastors at a local church. When he attended college at Boston, the North of America, he noticed black and white people mixing more freely than he'd seen growing up. Though these cities share their racial tension, they were far cry from the way things were down south. He became a community leader and a pastor with a mind to change this world about racism. Martin Luther King's first protest was the boycott Montgomery system. As Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give a bus seat to a white man, Martin Luther King and Anne Robinson joined forces to fight against the boycott system. Many blacks were killed in the protest. Many bombs exploded where they lived. Yes, as you think, a bomb was exploded at Martin Luther King's house, and he was thrown in jail in the name of bomb blasting in his own house, which was not caused by him. This drew the national assistance attention into it. In 1956, a Supreme Court decision banned segregated buses. He did many protests in his life for the welfare of the blacks, but this was his first and important protest throughout his life. I end by saying, don't ever, ever, my friends, judge a book by its cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Sham, for your amazing speech. Next, let's have Srijani to give us a clear view on the civil rights movement.
Good morning to one hour present here. I am Srijani from class 9C to tell you a speech on Martin Luther King. There are two reasons for someone to be famous. Either the person is a good person or a very bad person. Martin Luther King was one among the good ones who dedicated his life to the community. He was an American activist and minister. He was a great speaker that motivated the blacks to protest using non-violence. His inspiration for this works were Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. He gained his popularity from the civil rights movement which lasted from 1955 to 1968. Martin Luther King worked hard to bring equality to America and ensure civil rights for all people regardless of the race, color, gender, etc. His goals were to abolish racial discrimination in many areas, including the public transportation, employment, voting, and education. Finally, this banded racial discrimination in employment and public accommodations based on race, color, religion, or national origin. Thank you.
Thank you, Srijani, for those valuable informations. Here we have Archana of Class 8, here to state about the life history of Martin Luther King.
Good morning, respected Principal Ma'am, teachers, and my dear friends. Today, I am Archana of Grade 8, going to speak about Martin Luther King. On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. took the podium at the March on Washington and addressed the gathered crowd, which numbered 200,000 people or more. His speech became famous for its recurring phrase, "I have a dream." He imagined a future in which the sons of former slaves and the sons of the former slave owners could sit down together at the table of brotherhood. A future in which his 4 children are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. King's moving speech became a central part of his legacy. King was born in Atlanta, Georgia, USA in 1929. Like his father and grandfather, King studied theology and became a Baptist pastor. In 1957, he was elected the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, which became a leading civil rights organization. Under King's leadership, the SCLC promoted nonviolent resistance to segregation, often in the form of marches and boycotts. In his campaign for racial equality, King gave hundreds of speeches and was arrested more than 20 times. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his nonviolent struggle for civil rights. On December 1, 1955, an African American woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a white person and was arrested due to the racial segregation laws. This led to the Montgomery bus boycott, which was planned by E.D. Nixon and led by Martin Luther King. The boycott lasted for 385 days. During this time, King was arrested, his home was bombed, and he was subjected to personal abuse and threats. The protest ended on December 20, 1956, with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. In 1957, King and other civil rights leaders established the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a group to help local organizations carry out civil rights activities in the South. As leader of the SCLC, King inspired blacks throughout the South to hold peaceful sit-ins and voter education clinics and registration drives. During the March on Washington, Martin Luther King delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to a gathering of over 250,000 people. In speech's most famous passage, King departed from written text at Mahalia Jackson's cry, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." The speech is considered the defining moment of the American civil rights movement. It was ranked the top American speech in a 1999 poll of scholars. On April 4, 1968, King was shot and killed while standing on a balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, US. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana. It was really wonderful. Let's welcome Rashmika to talk on the topic how Martin Luther King influenced national opinion.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. I'm Rashmika and I'm going to speak about how Martin Luther King influenced national opinion. Martin Luther King Jr. is a civil rights legend. Dr. King led the movement to end segregation and counter prejudice in the United States through the means of peaceful protests. His speeches, some of the most iconic of the 20th century, had a profound effect on national consciousness. Through his leadership, the civil rights movement opened doors to education and employment that had long been closed to Black America. He was a leader of the American Civil Rights Movement. He organized a number of peaceful protests as head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, including the March on Washington in 1963. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, and at that time he was the youngest person to have done so. He was largely responsible for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Civil Rights Act banned discrimination in the workforce and public accommodation based on race, color, etc. The Voting Rights Act protects African Americans' right to vote. His first major role in the civil rights movement came in 1955 after an African American lady, Rosa Parks, was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white man on a bus. This sparked outrage in the African American community, and Martin helped to organize a boycott of the city buses. After 381 days of protest, a court finally ruled that such segregation laws should no longer be recognized. In 1957, King and other civil rights leaders established the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a group to help local organizations carry out civil rights activity in the South. In 1959, he went to India to meet with Prime Minister of India at that time, who was Jawaharlal Nehru, and others to discuss Gandhi's concept of peaceful protest. King was jailed along with a large number of supporters. From the Birmingham jail, he wrote his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail, in which he spelled out his philosophy of nonviolence. After the Birmingham campaign, an interracial group of more than 200,000 people gathered peacefully near the Lincoln Memorial to demand equal justice for all citizens under the law. Prominent civil rights leaders delivered speeches, and most memorable was the King's I Have a Dream speech. This is how he gained support in changing national opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmika, for your marvelous speech. Here we have our grade 6 students to display their posters made on Martin Luther King Jr., Power of Nonviolence. Collages made by grade 7 students on the topic Famous Quote on Martin Luther King Jr. And finally, the placards prepared by our grade 8 students on the topic Effect of Civil Rights Act. Thank you, grade 6, 7, and 8 students. We all love for going tours, right? With our friends and teachers, visiting new places, and learning many things. Can we go for a tour now? Our school teachers are going to take us for a virtual tour to the Civil Rights Museum at Memphis.
The struggle for civil rights. It's the story of humanity. It's the story of America. From its early flowering in 1955 with the gruesome murder of Emmett Till and Rosa Parks' heroic refusal to give up her seat on a segregated Alabama bus, to the sit-ins of 1960. The struggle for civil rights. It's the story of humanity. It's the story of America. From its early flowering in 1955 with the gruesome murder of Emmett Till and Rosa Parks' heroic refusal to give up her seat on a segregated Alabama bus, to the sit-ins of 1960 and the great push for integration in public accommodations, to the fierce, often brutal pushback from Middle America determined to thwart the social insurgency, to preserve the status quo, to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s soul-stirring letter from a Birmingham jail challenging the nation's conscience, to the seminal March on Washington, where he shared his dream for America with the masses, a dream of equality, liberty, and brotherhood. To his fateful trip to Memphis and his final days here, standing up for the city's oppressed garbage workers, to his assassination on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, we shall never forget.
Thank you, teachers. We all love the tour. Martin Luther King showed us lives must be lived intentionally and without regret. Those words mean we must speak up in front of injustice. He taught us that it is one thing to say you have an idea and quite another to act on it. And the man's courage still inspires millions of people today. Not only him, there are many other leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, Nelson Mandela, and many more who have a huge part in our history. They still live in our hearts as role models. We have come to the end of this program. I thank the management, staffs, and students of Velammal for bringing out this event a grand success. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for having spared your valuable time here with us today.
Preeti ma'am? Preeti ma'am, can we wind up, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we will wind up.